Bathroom Breaks and Bedtime Tales presents The Last Winter Before Spring by Sevastian Winters. The messenger came through on day 2 of the thaw. It wasn't like the others. Instead of hope, it brought silence, terrible, thick silence, and a single word: soon. Mira stood outside the half-collapsed schoolhouse, breathing in frost-tinged air, tasting the coppery edge of rust on her lips. Lev crouched beside her, his small hand tracing patterns in the muddy snow. She didn't have the heart to tell him it would soon melt away. It was all he'd known, a winter that never ended. Mira wasn't sure what to do with the thought of a spring. The river had begun to wake, carrying with it chunks of ice like gray memories from places they'd never been. Mira scanned the horizon, where thin wisps of smoke rose from distant camps. Travelers, survivors, everyone, like them, searching for a story worth believing. They moved on foot, northward, following rumors whispered around dying fires. "The ground beyond the river still grows," one old woman had said. Mira didn't trust it, but Lev clung to every word. "Do you think we'll really find it?" Lev asked, watching the shadows in the woods. "We'll find something," Mira said. She'd stopped promising specifics months ago. In a world that changed by the hour, specifics were liabilities. They walked until the sky bruised violet, stopping beside an abandoned farmhouse. The door hung open like a broken jaw. Inside smelled of mildew and burnt paper, walls covered in faded maps, symbols of places that no longer mattered. Mira gathered dry scraps of wood and paper, lighting a fire in the stone hearth. Lev crouched close, soaking in warmth, as Mira kept watch by the window, eyes scanning the forest edge. She had learned to look for things that belonged and things that didn't. The quiet rustling of leaves belonged. The faint sound of running water belonged. But when the leaves stilled or birds fell silent, when branches cracked unevenly, that was something else, something human and dangerous. "How much longer?" Lev asked, wrapped in the only blanket they had left. 2 days, maybe 3. And if it's not there? Mira forced a smile she didn't feel. "We keep moving." Lev closed his eyes, the trust on his face heavier than all the packs they'd carried. Mira sat quietly, letting the dark settle around them. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the world pressing in from all sides. She watched Lev breathe, slow and even, envying his escape. Hours later, a noise jolted her upright, the scrape of metal on stone. Mira's fingers found the handle of the knife she'd hidden in her sleeve. She held her breath. In the doorway stood a figure, backlit by the dying fire. A woman, thin as wire, face shadowed, but eyes glinting like wet stones. "Easy," the woman said, raising empty hands, "just seeking shelter." Mira didn't relax. She knew people lied better than they breathed. "Stay where you are," Mira warned. The woman obeyed, settling cautiously by the fire. Her movements were slow, non-threatening, but Mira saw the way her eyes moved, calculating. Silence stretched out. "Where are you headed?" the woman finally asked. "North," Mira said flatly. The woman smiled, bitterly. "Good luck. Nothing left up there. Nothing but echoes and ice." Lev stirred, pulling the blanket closer. "We heard it's safe," he murmured, eyes still shut. The woman shook her head. "No place is safe, least of all the ones that promise it." Mira felt anger rise hot in her chest. "What do you want?" The woman looked up, eyes calm and weary. The same as you. A tomorrow I can believe in. Mira felt the words more than she heard them. She lowered the knife slowly, suspicion ebbing into exhaustion. "Then tell me where we find it," she whispered. The woman reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded map, faded and stained, passing it carefully to Mira. "There's no safety," she said softly, "but there are others like you, trying anyway." Mira took the map, its texture rough, edges worn from countless hands. Something shifted inside her, a stubborn thread of hope, frayed but intact. "Why help us?" Mira asked. The woman looked past Mira, eyes haunted by something Mira recognized too well. "Because hope is contagious," she whispered. "If you survive, maybe I can too." They left at dawn, the stranger disappearing into the gray woods as silently as she'd arrived. Lev kept close to Mira, small fingers clinging to hers. They moved slowly, following the map's faded lines toward a place marked by a single, faint word: spring. Each day, the snow melted a little more, the earth becoming soft beneath their feet. Mira watched for signs, anything to confirm or deny the fragile promise the stranger had left them. Then, on the fourth morning, the trees thinned, and they stepped into a clearing filled with golden green grass, the air thick with the scent of thawing earth and blooming flowers. Mira heard Lev gasp softly, felt his fingers tighten in hers. Before them stood not a paradise, not a sanctuary, but a community, simple, ragged, human. People moved quietly, tending fires, repairing roofs, faces carrying lines carved by seasons of survival. A woman stepped forward, smiling gently, and Mira saw something in her eyes she thought she'd forgotten: recognition. "We've been waiting for you," she said softly. Mira's voice caught in her throat. "Us?" The woman nodded slowly. "Everyone who still believes." That night, around a fire that warmed but didn't quite dispel the chill, Mira finally allowed herself to close her eyes. Lev slept nearby, breathing softly. Around them, people murmured stories, words drifting like embers into the darkness, mingling, becoming something larger than the cold. It wasn't safety they'd found, not exactly. It was a story worth waking for. Mira knew tomorrow would still carry uncertainty. She knew the world was broken, that healing came slow, that spring was never promised. But here, in this circle of tired voices and steady breaths, she understood something she'd missed all those nights in abandoned buildings and frozen fields. Hope was never a place. It was people who chose to move forward despite everything. She settled into the warmth, letting exhaustion claim her. But before sleep took hold, she whispered one quiet promise into the darkness, uncertain but defiant: soon. Mira woke to voices, gentle but urgent. She sat up, her body aching from exhaustion and travel. Lev was still asleep, curled up against the wall, breathing softly, one hand open as if reaching towards something she couldn't see. She stood slowly, stretching limbs stiff from too many nights sleeping rough. The community outside the small shelter was already moving, the rhythm of the morning quiet and purposeful. Mira stepped outside, breathing in air scented with thawing earth and the subtle sweetness of things beginning to bloom. The woman from the night before, the one who had greeted them, approached quietly, her eyes kind but serious. "You're welcome to stay," she said, "but we need you to understand what this place is. We're not here to hide. We're here to build something worth defending." Mira nodded, scanning the small settlement. People moved between low buildings and makeshift shelters, tending fires, carrying tools. It wasn't paradise, but it was alive. That counted for something. "I've been running for years," Mira said quietly. "Lev, too. We didn't know places like this still existed." "They didn't," the woman said simply. "We had to make it." Mira looked at her, the reality dawning slowly. This wasn't a refuge. It was a stand, a gathering place for people who still believed in something beyond mere survival. "What do you call this place?" Mira asked. The woman smiled softly. "Spring." Mira let the word sink in. Hope had become a fragile thing, too often crushed by promises left unkept. But looking around now, she felt a slow resolve building, warmer than she'd known in years. Lev stepped outside then, yawning and rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked around, blinking in confusion at the busy strangers and unfamiliar structures. "Is this it?" he asked softly. "It's a start," Mira told him, and something shifted quietly inside her chest, like an iron weight, long held, finally slipping loose. Days turned into weeks. Spring grew warmer, the sun stronger, the sky clearer than anyone had remembered in years. Mira and Lev learned the rhythms of the small community, how the land was tilled, the water purified, the fragile balance of trust maintained among people who had each walked roads long and harsh enough to break lesser hearts. And slowly, Mira began to understand something essential. Hope wasn't an idea, or a place, or even a promise. It was action. The quiet work of planting seeds without guarantees. The steady discipline of building structures that might one day shelter others they'd never meet. Yet even here, peace was tenuous. Whispered news arrived with travelers from the south. Rumors of armies moving, of treaties breaking, of new conflicts igniting on old borders. The world outside remained unstable, teetering between healing and ruin. Mira felt the weight of that uncertainty every night when the sun set and shadows crept into their small settlement. One morning, Mira rose early to find Lev gone from their shelter. Panic shot through her veins, sharp and cold. She hurried outside, searching until she spotted him near the riverbank, crouched beside a girl about his age, both quietly building something from mud and sticks. Mira exhaled, relieved. The girl glanced up at her briefly, eyes wary but curious. Lev smiled, proud of the crude little hut they'd made. "It's for the birds," Lev said softly, "so they'll have somewhere safe too." Mira knelt beside them, swallowing the lump in her throat. She understood then why this place mattered, not because it was perfect or permanent, but because it gave even children a chance to build something small and fragile, trusting it might last. But that afternoon, scouts returned grim-faced. Mira listened as they spoke with the settlement leader, the woman who'd first welcomed them. She caught fragments: soldiers moving north, towns burning, refugees on the roads again, danger coming closer, again. That night, Mira lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, Lev breathing softly beside her. She knew what came next, the familiar ache of packing their lives again, running again. But something inside her resisted, harder than it ever had before. She wasn't ready to abandon what they'd started, not this time. At dawn, she found the woman already awake, staring quietly at the gray sky. "We'll need to leave again," Mira said softly. won't we?" The woman turned, her eyes heavy with sorrow and determination. "Some will, others will stay. If everyone runs, hope dies right here. This time, we defend what we've built." Mira felt the weight of that statement sink into her bones. She looked back at Lev, who was now awake, watching her with calm trust. He had lived his life running, but something about this place, this moment, felt like a line that had to be drawn. She nodded slowly, committing herself to the moment, to this quiet, fragile stand they'd built. "Then we'll stay." Days passed quickly. The settlement transformed from refuge to fortress. Mira learned how to hold a weapon, how to trust others in ways she'd long forgotten. They prepared defenses, gathered supplies, exchanged silent acknowledgments that some of them might not see another thaw. But even in this tension, something vital flourished: belief. The day the army finally arrived, Mira stood on the ridge with Lev and the others, watching dark shapes move across the distant fields. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Fear was real, heavy in her lungs. But beside it, something else: defiance, clear and cold as the winter she'd survived. The army halted on the far shore, figures small and gray in the distance. A tense stillness settled over the settlement. Mira felt Lev reach for her hand, gripping tightly. She glanced down, seeing no fear in his eyes, only quiet resolve. She squeezed his hand once, gently. They stood, not moving, not yielding. Minutes stretched into hours. And then, without a word or signal, the distant figures slowly turned, retreating into the dusk from which they'd emerged. When night fell again, a fragile peace settled over spring. Mira and Lev sat by the fire, surrounded by others who had made the choice to stay. The woman, their leader, approached quietly, her face shadowed by firelight. "Why did they leave?" Mira asked softly. The woman sat, her gaze steady and fierce. "Because they saw something they weren't prepared for." Mira frowned. What was that? "People who had chosen to believe," the woman said simply. "That's more powerful than they understand." Mira looked at Lev, seeing the fire reflected in his eyes. It wasn't peace they'd found, not yet. It was something harder and stronger, something earned. Belief, hope, defiant and stubborn. Together they'd held their ground. Together they'd protected their fragile spring. And whatever came tomorrow, whatever new storm threatened, they would face it the same way. Not with certainty, but with courage. Because the truth Mira had finally understood was this: spring wasn't something you found, it was something you made. Author's note: this story, The Last Winter Before Spring, felt important to tell right now because it captures the heart of our current global uncertainty and, at the same time, provides a resonant path forward. We're living in a moment when multiple crises intersect: climate instability, geopolitical tensions, economic precarity, and widespread societal anxiety. This story doesn't deny those realities, it embraces them openly. Mira and Lev's journey is one of navigating uncertain terrain, of coping with crisis after crisis, of feeling the pressure of constantly shifting ground beneath their feet. But what's critical, what sets this story apart and makes it deeply relevant, is the profound clarity it offers about the nature of hope. Hope isn't passive, it's action. Mira and Lev don't wait for things to get better. They move toward what they believe might be better. That reflects precisely what people everywhere are facing. Waiting no longer feels like an option. active belief, effort, and movement forward are vital. Hope doesn't promise safety, it offers courage. Their decision to stay in the settlement isn't about guarantees of safety, it's about commitment. They decide that some places, some values, are worth standing up for, even without promises of success. Hope is communal, not solitary. Mira and Lev find others who share their belief. This mirrors a universal truth we desperately need to remember now. Surviving uncertainty requires unity and mutual support. The world today needs less isolation, more communities of resilience and action. Hope is contagious. The mysterious woman who helps them does so because their survival might validate her own possibility of survival. Hope grows when shared, something profoundly true in the global challenges we're all facing now. Hope is created, not discovered. The ending underscores a critical idea. Spring isn't something found, it's something made. This directly answers our global sense of helplessness. In a moment of overwhelming crises, it reminds us that we're not passively waiting for the world to improve. We're actively building it, choice by choice, courage by courage. This story matters because it doesn't shy away from darkness. It moves through it. It doesn't give false comfort. It insists on active participation. It offers exactly what people facing deep uncertainty need most. Not promises of easy solutions, but the profound reassurance that even in chaos, meaningful change is always possible if we choose it together.